Now we're going to talk a little bit about how we manipulate the document object model from JavaScript. And so here we are in our happy little request response cycle. And so the document object model, of course, is how we out here in the real world, we view web pages, right? That's what we're seeing. So what we're going to see now is, and we're going to have a request response cycle that's going to have JavaScript in it, but that's no big deal. You'll notice that all these files I'm playing with now are HTML files. So they're static files. They're not even running on the server at all. But inside them, they have some JavaScript. And now we're going to look at how JavaScript can both look at things from the document object model, look them up and pull them out, and then put stuff back in the document object model. We've already saw how you can use document write to append to the document object model, and we see these things. And so this is the core essence of interactivity that does not require request response cycles, when we can manipulate the document object model interactively in JavaScript. Now, in the next few lectures, we're going to come up with all kinds of ways. JavaScript's going to talk to the server and then update the document object model. But for now, we're really just going to focus on this bit of code right here, where JavaScript is manipulating the document object model, and not worry about the other cool things that JavaScript can do. Okay, so the document object model has been around since the beginning of time. And when JavaScript was created, the document object model existed. The problem is in 1995, all these browsers kind of evolved independently. They all had sort of an internal data structure for how they would represent HTML once they parsed it, but they weren't the same. And so because the inconsistency of the document object model, and because they knew that they could never get JavaScript out if they said every document object model has to be the same, they didn't force the document object model's shape, the structure of what's a child of what inside the document object model. They never forced that to be the same. Okay, and so there's other ways that we have to go look things up. You can always look things up, but it's not as portable. So like I said, not all browsers represent their page the exact same way. And in the old days, we would write JavaScript code, and then we get a bug that said on IE 7.3.1, you just blew up. But everything else works, and Firefox works, and this works, and that works. That's less of a problem these days, but we will see. And so we would end up with bugs that are just like, this thing works on everything but Internet Explorer. It blows up and no options display. And this would be an example where you're writing code as a developer and you tested on Firefox, but then you put it in production and someone used Internet Explorer. That happens all the time. And it's very, very, very frustrating. But it's still important to be able to do basic, simple things to the document object model. And so what they did is, because the shapes weren't the same, and so what I mean by shape is, this comes here, the document, and then the forms are down here, and the iframes are over here, and what comes underneath these things. And there was a hierarchy that you could go like document.x.y.z sub 4, and that might be the fourth form or something, right? But the sequence of these things is different. So the shapes in IE, Internet Explorer, or Chrome, or whatever, have different document object models, because that was sort of treated as just a thing that the browser was allowed to do. The developers of the browser were allowed to architect their own document object model based on what they thought was the coolest thing to do. And so the idea is that in the early days of JavaScript, they said, we are not going to standardize the document model, but what we want to do is we want to be able to find something deep in the document object model independent of, we don't know what the shape is, but if we can mark this little one with ID equals Bob, then I want to be able to grab this little thing, not knowing where it fits in the tree, but if we put an ID tag on it, and that is a function that was built into all the document object models called getElementById. So instead of starting a document and working your way down, you just say, look, I don't care. You go find the one that has ID equals Bob. And so that's called getElementById. So what we do is we use this ID tag, and we've seen this in CSS. We've used this in CSS as well, but we also can use this in JavaScript as a way to distinguish a particular tag. Now, there's the class equals and the ID equals. You can only have one tag in an entire document that has the same ID. So ID equals person, there can only be one tag that has an ID of person. So we are marking somehow this text Chuck, okay? And saying, so this by the span tag is just a tag that does nothing. All we're doing here by putting an ID on is giving us a handle for that text. And so now what we can do is we can come into our JavaScript and we can say document.getElementById person. And that says go through your whole document object model, wherever that thing's at, and find me this tag. So this bit right here, that bit right there, is what you get. You get the tag, span ID equals. It's not the text, it's not Chuck. And if you want to go down and you want to go deeper to get just this bit, then you say dot inner HTML. And so that pulls this stuff out. And so that's where it says string equals Chuck down here. So it's actually pulled the actual text. You go find the tag and then dive into the tag. And sometimes the tag itself has children in it. And so sometimes it's actually quite complicated. But in this case, I just had a span tag with some inner HTML, and away you go. Okay? And then it doesn't have to be that we just, this is basically looking something up from the document object model. And then I can console log it, add console.dir that just shows us this, and it's really nice because then you can expand this and you can see all the little details that are in that tag, and that's a good way of debugging and then writing code. And then I can actually change it. So I go document object model get element ID inner HTML. So this actually is a handle to this Chuck text, whatever's between those span tags, and that actually rewrites the document object model and puts Joseph in there instead. So if you were to see that, you'd see Joseph on the screen. And so that's what you see afterwards, right? And if you can expand that document.dir, this is what's quite nice about this is the console.dir. I think console.log because roughly the same thing if you like. It gives you this, and you can look down through things and scan, and that's how you can find things like, you know, inner HTML or whatever, because you can see all these things. And child nodes, for example, is if our span tag, which is in the document object model somewhere, this is our span tag. That's our span tag. It can have child nodes that go within it, so that'd be span within something. And so here's a little bit of code that is JavaScript that's running an onClick, where and again, when you start doing JavaScript in the browser and you want to mess with the DOM, you tend to add IDs on tags to give yourself handles to various pieces so you can change them, delete them, put new stuff in them. And so here's a span on this string stuff, right? This string stuff right here. I've got a handle ID stuff. So I can grab this tag, document ID. This is an onClick for this back button. This back is an onClick that runs this JavaScript. As soon as I click on back, it's going to run this code, and it's going to grab that tag and then take the inner HTML of the tag and stick back in. So that basically puts BACK. So if I press back, this DOM, without going to the server, this DOM just changes to back. And if I click forth, click this forth, which is this forth, then that goes and grabs this same thing, and then the inner HTML is changed to forth. So that wipes that out, forth, and it looks like that. So you can go back, forth, back, forth, back, forth, back, forth, and this stuff is just changing. And this is just really simple, basic browser interactivity. Here's a little bit of code that's a little more complex that's manipulating the document object model. And so what we're going to do is we're going to have this little more tag, and we're going to have an onClick method. The href mean that's a way that we say don't load anything. That it's not really a link to anywhere. It's an interactive thing that's going to make something happen inside this document. And so whenever we click on that, we're going to call the add function in JavaScript and then return false to avoid going to some page, right? And so now what we're going to do is, this is all just HTML at this point, HTML, and we're going to make a UL tag, and we're going to put an LI tag in there, first item. So if you first look at this page, you'll see that and nothing else. And then we're going to have some JavaScript. So in this JavaScript, we're going to set a very global variable called counter to be 1. We're going to do console.log just for yucks, and then we'll create this function called add. And this function called add is going to be run every time we click on that. So it's going to click, run add, return false. Click, run add, return false. So every time we click on this, what it's going to do is it's going to do a document create element. So what that does is it creates an li tag /li that has nothing in it, but it's not connected anywhere to the document object model. We can give it a class. This x is this thing. We can put a class equals on it. Okay, we put a class equals on it. That's what this does. And we can set the inner HTML to be the counter. and then whatever this variable is, counter, and then add 1 to it. Well, then what we're going to do is we're going to graft it in. So we're going to grab this li tag, a ul tag, which is this tag right here, and we're going to add a new child. So the way to think about this is the ul is the parent and the li is the child. Now we're doing it, adding another child to it, another li tag. So this was the li tag we kind of made out here, and then we connect that li tag to this ul tag. And then we add 1 to the counter. So counter equals 1, and then we would do this again. Every time we click this, it's going to run this over and over again. So a new li tag gets added every time we do this. And there's no request response cycles going on, right? We have the DOM, we have JavaScript, and it's just changing the DOM, and as soon as the DOM changes, you see this. If there was stuff down here, it will get reformatted and moved down. And so you change the DOM, it reformats, it rejustifies, it does all the kinds of things that it's going to do. And so this is an example of generating dynamically some HTML that we can see by manipulating the DOM and doing various things. Now, that's how we did it in the old days. That's 1995 to 2005, 2006. For 10 years, we wrote code like that. And the problem was it wasn't portable, and it was kind of just long, a lot of little details. You can do it, but it was so clunky, and there's so many things. And as we wanted to build cool interactivity, it got the amount of code you had to write just got bigger and bigger and bigger. So a series of libraries in the mid-2000s, 2004, 2005, 2006, came out that tried to make JavaScript in the DOM a more functional way to write code. And a number of them came out, MooTools, Prototype, but the one that everyone loves now over 10 years later is called jQuery. And so what jQuery did is it solved 2 problems. It made messing with the DOM really easy and portable. So jQuery knows all the browsers and all the quirks of all the browsers, and you'd say in jQuery, do this. Go find this tag and do this to that tag. And if there was something you had to do for a particular version of a browser, jQuery would worry about that. And so jQuery solved the portability problems. They solved the DOM differences, the underlying functions, things like how wide is the window. It used to be you'd have an if statement and this much code to figure out how wide the window was. Whereas in jQuery, you go like, how wide's the window? And it has the if statement in it. So it's really amazing. And we really, at this point, it's rather rare to do anything other than the simplest kind of manipulation in the DOM without using jQuery. So many people just assume that jQuery is always there, but it wasn't always there. It wasn't there for the first 10 years. And it was so painful in that first 10 years that things like jQuery had to be built. And so when we start talking about jQuery, well, I'm not going to do much more DOM manipulation until we start doing that with jQuery. So this is a quick run through JavaScript, how we kind of write code, what the basic syntax of the language is, all the way up through manipulating the document object model using the kind of early version, the first 10 years of JavaScript. And you still do that. Sometimes you want to keep your page really small and you only want to do a tiny little thing, so you kind of revert back to get element by ID and that kind of activity. Especially as old browsers go away, the portability issues are less and less of a problem. But as we really start playing with the document object model, we'll play using libraries like jQuery.